You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
All right, let's get back to some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome to the program. My name is Chris Spangle. It is so great to have you here today, and we are going to be talking about Ukraine. What is happening in Ukraine? Why did Putin invade Ukraine? What's all this about neo-Nazis and drug addicts? And there's just so much to this. So we've got an all-star panel of people to come to you to talk about it today. So stay tuned. We'll be right after this.
In a way, it ends where it begins.
Very insightful.
Thank you for sharing this Red Baron with us, Linda. It's so tasty, it makes me want to share something of my own. I didn't actually read the book.
Me neither.
I watched the movie last night.
I judged it by its cover.
I haven't read a book since middle school.
I'm secretly seeing two other book clubs.
But I can't even read.
I'm not really Gary. He just paid me to be here. Sharing Red Baron pizza can lead to more sharing.
Warning. This show is for adults by semi-adults, so the language is sometimes strong and offensive.
I don't know what I said.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking to your friends. If you struggle to understand politics, we explain it from an independent, libertarian point of view. With all of the irreverence it deserves, we toss out the screaming heads, put people before political parties, and give context to the news to make you think. Now, here's our host, Chris Spangle, a 15-year veteran of politics and media.
There are times where I haven't had a chance to do many research shows over the last few months for many reasons, but I've been obsessed with this for a week, and so I've got so many things I want to say, and I am hoping that any of the co-hosts today that are joining us will be able to get a word in edgewise. I'm very full of knowledge. Speaking of full of something, Harry Price is here, our perma co-host, the beloved Harry Price. Say hello to the people.
Hi, everyone. It's going good on my end. Fresh off of doing two low-key wall episodes versus Spangle.
Massively productive, yeah. Also here is sometimes co-host Trisha Stewart-Mann, the lovely host of Gingerarchy, the well-read host of Gingerarchy. Today, she will be representing the Peace at Any Cost Brigade.
What a strange statement.
We're glad to have her here. Foreign policy is definitely her specialty and close to her heart. Reinhold will be along. He's got some work today. He'll be here, and he will be stressed out to find out that we have a member of the Mises Caucus on the show today. Mac, thanks for joining us. Longtime listener, first-time guest on the program, and obsessive Ukrainian war watcher. You've been tweeting out all kinds of great stuff over the last few days, really. Have you gotten any sleep, or are you just watching the bombs fall?
I slept a little bit last night, not too much, but yeah, every time I think I'm going to sleep, I roll over. I'm like, I wonder what's happening now. And then it's another 2 hours. I'm like, I should go to sleep because my eyes are vibrating. I'm a news junkie, so I love talking on this show about current events and covering the news and all that, and you get a subject like this and just watching what's going on, trying to figure out what's going on, researching what happened, what draws your interest to it, Mac? It started in the initial invasion in 2014. I credit Vice for having some pretty good on-the-ground reporting. I had already been looking at some of the Arab Spring stuff on Twitter and things, and found that there's a lot that you can glean from information from social media, not just people posting cat photos. So Vice really, I don't know why exactly. It was one of the few examples, other than the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, of a war essentially being distributed through social media. and Vice had some really good reporting on that, and actually to the detriment of some forces, because Russia kept trying to deny that they had anybody in Ukraine. Meanwhile, their soldiers are posting on Instagram and Russian social media with geotags. And, so it's it just kind of captivated my interest. I fell off for a little bit because it calmed down, in air quotes, and they sort of had a supposed ceasefire, even though they've been shelling each other back and forth for 8 years, essentially. In smaller skirmishes, and Russia has been, amassing stuff on the border for a while. It's just picked up recently, and I actually didn't think Russia was going to invade, to be honest.
Not many people did, and if they did, everybody thought that it was. So let me kind of break down for what's happening. But first, I want to thank our patrons. I have been calling our patrons. I've talked about 10, 15 of them so far, and it has been so much fun to get to talk to the people that support this program, hear why they support us. To a person, the thing that they like most is that we break down current events and that we are helping them understand the news in a nonpartisan way. We're not Team Red, we're not Team Blue, and we try to be fair, even though we come from a libertarian perspective. And the thing that they don't like is too long. So we'll work on that. We want to especially thank our $100 a month members, John Pusilo, Casey Feldposh, Lars Nordskog, Jake Edel, Matthew Durbin, Reinhold, Christy Avery, and Jason Doolittle. So if you've been living under a rock, this is, let me just give like a summation of what is happening. Like everything that happens in history, it doesn't just start at one point in time. Like Vladimir Putin didn't just roll tanks into this country. He has had, like Max said, a long build up over time, over many years. He has invaded Ukraine previously in Crimea. And so what is the relationship between the Ukraine and Russia? In the beginning of the Soviet Union, Ukraine had a separatist movement, and there were many other countries in the Soviet Union. We tend to think of the Soviet Union as like one big block, and that's not how the Soviet Union was set up. It was set up as a series of republics, and borders were drawn, and Lenin was the one that actually set up these different borders and republics, including Ukraine. And this entire area has a long history of being invaded. Like, if you look at the history of Ukraine, they never seem to have ever been at peace. And there is always tension on the eastern side and the western side of which way they'll go, basically. Will they align with Western democratic countries, or will they align with Eastern, autocratic societies like Putin and China? And that has reverberated through the history of this country, but especially the last 150 years. And in the world, there is basically an alignment to the European countries in the United States and Western democracies, and then there is the more autocratic Russian society that Putin has built over time. And in 1991, they were given their independence from the Soviet Union and wanted to set up their own self-determination. And in exchange for giving up their nuclear weapons as a country, the United States promised to protect them. Oh, if you would only know about what Americans know about their government, you would stop trusting them. And so they de-armed themselves in this agreement, and Russia promised never to invade them. And then you fast forward to 2004. You have, some of you may have remembered the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, where the guys' names are super similar, Vladimir Yushchenko, and Harry, do you remember his name? I've got it right here, but I'm not going to look for it. Basically, the Russian puppet or the NATO puppet. And the NATO puppet won, and then that set off a period of back and forths between the Russian-aligned and the Western-aligned presidents. Now, what is NATO? NATO is this treaty that was formed in 1949 between all of the Western countries that wanted to counter the power of the USSR, the communist bloc. And so NATO, since really should have been disbanded in 1994. After the Soviet Union fell, what was the point of it? Why continue to have it? And it's a collective security agreement. So if, let's say, Estonia gets invaded by Russia, then the other treaty members agree to go and protect that country. It's a security conglomerate. And NATO has been expanding its territory and adding new countries, including the countries that butt up right against Russia. They're up to 30 different countries now. And Ukraine, Belarus, and I think a couple other countries are on the table at all times to join NATO, which is something that the Russians don't like. The Russians essentially have been invaded through their history. There's a long flat plain between Western Europe and Moscow, and it continually gets invaded. And so they have a very vested interest in keeping their borders secure. They want that buffer zone, and Lushenko, thank you, Emily. And so this has been a provocation to Putin. Now, would Putin have invaded Ukraine with or without NATO? I think so, because Putin, at the end of the day, like I told you in 2014 or 2013, that Putin is a dictator. He poisoned that Ukrainian Orange Revolution leader. He's poisoned his dissidents. Any libertarian worth their salt, if they were in Russia, would be poisoned, jailed, or killed. And he is an enemy of freedom in all ways, shapes, and forms. So now I open it up to the panel. Now that we kind of have our history lesson of what's gone on, Putin, at the end of the day, wants to reinstate Imperial Russia, not the Soviet Union. He wants to instate the Tsarist Russia. He loves the Tsars. That's why everything's gold with him. And that includes, by the way, Helsinki, Finland, Warsaw, Poland. So I don't think, Mac, you followed this stuff for a long time. I was never under the impression that he was going to stop in Crimea. In Ukraine, there's two different regions that have been aligned with Russia that have a large Russian population. The Russians in the Ukraine make up about 17% of the country. The rest is largely Ukrainian. They're two different cultures. They're not the same thing. Two different languages, two different separate cultures. And the Russians inside these two disputed regions want to align with Russia. And they have continually they've had elections, but the elections have not necessarily been free and fair. There is also a large amount of Nazis that are there fighting for the Ukrainian national sovereignty, I guess is the word. So, Mac, I have no question for you. Just give your thoughts on what I said. I said a lot there, and I know that you probably heard stuff that you'd like to articulate on.
I just a fairly good rundown of the brief overview of how we got to where we're at. That eastern part of Ukraine butts up right against Russia. The Russian Empire, the Tsarist nation as a whole, sort of has its roots in Ukraine. Ukraine's kind of seen, in Putin's eyes, I think, as sort of the jewel of the former Soviet states that he'd like to reincorporate under the Russian flag. It gets dicey when it comes to differentiating Ukrainians and Russians, because there's an ethnic element to it that is sort of hard to decipher from American perspective. Especially, we think of colors more than regions and tribes, like the East still really does, especially in the Middle East, which is a whole other can of worms. But even during that 2014 invasion, a lot of Ukrainian forces that were unprepared for what was happening, from the sort of Western side, the nationalist side that was not in the breakaway region, that was going into these breakaway regions to restore order, just laid down their weapons because they were being confronted by Ukrainian citizens that were saying, hey, no, stop this. You're firing, you're basically threatening your own people here. And they weren't willing to, shoot civilians essentially. So they just kind of abandoned their armored vehicles. And I think that footage is still in a lot of that Vice series, the dispatches from Ukraine.
Yeah.
You can see that where they just lay down there. They basically abandoned their weapons and armored vehicles. Okay, this is weird. I think a lot of them were confused about the situation and not sure. It wasn't as clear cut, I think, to a lot of the forces of whose side they were on or why they're fighting. And I'm seeing some interesting things like that with the Russians and the Ukrainians.
There's been a couple videos that I've seen where Russian soldiers were like, wait, we're fighting the Ukrainians? That's not why I came here. Which has happened a lot in Soviet history. So there was something called the Minsk Agreements, which is in Belarus, and Germany and France moderated the Minsk protocols between Russia and the Ukraine over the regions Donetsk and Luhansk, excuse me. I've got a cold and my face isn't working right today. And that was in September of 2014, trying to mediate some agreement. And then there was Minsk II. And the Russians have now said we were never actually a party to that. But it basically was negotiating the ceasefires between the Ukrainian army and the people that have basically been fighting in these two regions. The Russians are an avowed neo-Nazi group, the Avos, which, like, you read their history, you read about them, they are an actual neo-Nazi group. And so when Putin is talking about how they're going to denazify Germany or denazify the Ukraine, that's what he's talking about. And they're a pretty violent group, but there's like 400 of them. And they say that only 20% of them are neo-Nazis. So it's a little bit of Russian propaganda to say that it's all, that they're only fighting Nazis in the country because there's thousands of people fighting. There's been hundreds of people that have been killed in this region from 2014 on. There has been constant skirmishes and tensions in these two regions. And everybody thought that Putin would invade that one region. And instead he invaded the entire country. And I should say that Escalja brings up a good point. And Harry, maybe you can weigh in on this. He also annexed Georgian territory. If you remember Saakashvili back in 2008, it's hard to argue that's about NATO encroachment. Doesn't Putin's argument that he's fighting the NATO encroachment when he invades Georgia, not a NATO member, Belarus, not a NATO member, Ukraine, not a NATO member, doesn't his argument that this is about the West kind of fall apart when he's invading non-NATO territories? Why wouldn't he take them on directly?
Exactly. And he's also gone after indirectly, like in Kazakhstan, by sending peacekeeping troops in to help, like, to put down like riots that possibly if he has started.
Well, that's what he's saying. Yeah, these are peacekeeping missions, Harry. He's saving them from the genocide that's happening in these two regions when there's no genocide taking place.
Correct. And the Kazakhstani people just want to try to get their they just want free elections away from like Russian interference, and that's what they're like rioting about. And this is like, in Kazakhstan is a landlocked country. Part of the old Soviet bloc of like countries over there. So like, it's not like, oh, NATO's getting close to them. Like, how they're stuck over there on the other side. You know?
Trisha, you want to weigh in here? You're muted. Trisha, you're muted.
Wow, that's not a real podcast.
Oh yeah, look at that. Oh, the girl had tech issues, and my tech issue was I didn't hit unmute. Yeah, so a little bit about that NATO situation. I think that NATO gets dangled over Ukraine's head a lot, and obviously, I don't think it's ever going to happen. Like, oh yeah, they're going to join forces because everybody else has to vote besides the United States that they get to be a part of it. But I do think there is a little bit of merit to that, and the fact that it's more NATO friendly. Those countries are. I don't know if that means a lot as far as like them advancing against NATO forces. But I think a lot of what's happening right now, as far as Russian propaganda, a lot of it actually is there. Some of what Putin is saying is rooted in truth, but there's an ulterior motive, like you said.
Right.
Like, obviously, fighting 400 neo-Nazis really wouldn't, require invading all of Ukraine. So I always think that truth here is somewhere in the middle, and it's not good guy, Ukraine, freedom, free elections, bad guy, Putin, evil Russian propaganda. I think it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it's really hard not to get drawn into this kind of stuff. Like the Ghost pilot. I don't know if the first ace in the 21st century who shot down 6 Russian planes. Russia Today. So take this with a big grain of salt when RT is reporting that whole so basically this ship pulls up to this island where 13 Ukrainian soldiers are defending it. And they have this long diatribe about how you need to surrender because we're going to kill you. And you hear audio of one of the guys go, should I tell them to fuck off? Fuck you! And then they all got killed. Well, Russia Today is saying that that's a made-up story. Or you watch the Ukrainian president, in stark contrast to our own president, be virile and young and well-spoken and articulate. And you go, wow, this is a great leader. And I'm not taking that away from him. I think he's an impressive person. He's, the United States is like, please come, we'll save you. And he's like, I need ammunitions, not a ride. A lot of that stuff, you have to look at it like propaganda. This is Ukraine trying to recruit the West to get involved in their fight. Just as Putin is saying to, people in America through Russia Today, this is Russian territory. Here's the history. He gives this hour-long speech basically full of twisted, incorrect history, talks about genocide, how they're just saving the Russians. We're just going to Anschluss, Austria, and we need to save the Germans that are being persecuted in the Sudetenland. And that's all we're going to take. Don't worry about it. Both of these sides want to pull you in, Trisha. They want you to, and the United States wants you to take the Ukrainian side, including the media, because we have access to all of their media and access to none of the Russian side.
Disclaimer, I do have some friends that actually work for RT. So I'm that crazy. I'm that crazy lunatic.
I watched it the other night. I was like, well, this is backwards.
Well, no, you know what? So some of their stuff is good, just like anything. Yeah. The funny thing is we, watching, this play out on a world stage, want good guys and bad guys, and that just doesn't exist in the world. Everybody's a little bit of both, some more than others, and obviously aggression can be met with self-defense. I believe in that. But as far as like the Putin speech, so I finally did get a chance to listen to it, and like not all of it was garbage. I think it was painted and portrayed as garbage. He talks a little bit about the history of Russia and the genocide that happened there and the fears of it and protecting their people. And I think that there's some truth to that. Now, is he using that to twist, to chime up, propaganda and get people behind, invading Ukraine? And invasion is a really strong word.
It's not a strong word in this case, Trisha. Vladimir Putin is an evil human being that invaded a sovereign country.
I don't disagree. I'm not one of those people that's a Putin sympathizer, like at all. I'm not a fool.
We'll leave that to the Mises Caucus guy next.
Yeah.
And I was actually
a strong car.
I was actually going to defend Biden a little bit, so this might really get the Mises Caucus guy. Dennis, where are you? I would say that one good thing that Biden did, and I think it's really important, it was saying that we're not going to put boots on the ground. I think that's really important, and that was a strong statement, and he should have said it. And we need to not give them weapons. He did talk about giving them a humanitarian support, and that's fine. Don't give them weapons, and don't put boots on the ground.
Should we allow the Ukrainian government to buy weapons from our weapons manufacturers?
No.
Okay. Mac, what do you think?
I don't know. Well, that specifically, I say free market. Whatever, whoever buys,
full ANCAP. And listen, the child soldiers in Ukraine need as much ammunition as possible.
I am an anarchist. Number one, I am not going to speak for the whole Mises Caucus.
We're just teasing you. I don't.
I just want to make sure that people listening, I'm not an ambassador. I actually wasn't even going to bring that up at all. But
you're a very
wanna
reasonable person because you and I talk all the time. You're friends. You're willing to associate yourself with us. You're going to be canceled for this, but Mac is a great guy, and I've known Mac forever, and he's been on the show, I think, actually once before. I interviewed you at a thing, but no, we're teasing him about the Mises Caucus thing.
I just wanted to make sure. I was like, hey, I'm not the ambassador here. I'm not the emissary that's been sent. I'm just associated with them. I am an organizer. I want to circle back to the Georgia thing and the NATO thing a little bit.
Saakashvili.
Yes, they were not NATO nations, and they were not that close to joining, but they were close. They were in talks. And from a strategic standpoint, if you're Putin and you're thinking, I want to reunify the Russian people, because in his mind, at least what he's projected outwardly, and he wrote a blog post, I think, like in 2004 or something. I can't remember the exact date, but he kind of goes over this about very romantic idea of the Russian people and the unification. The West has driven a wedge between our people and divided up all the nations to weaken the Russians, because he doesn't, it's this ethnic thing versus country thing. But from a strategic, tactical standpoint, you kind of want to invade a country before they join NATO, because if they're in NATO already, they're obligated under Article 5. It's like an immediate, like, well, we signed the agreement, we got to go. Versus if they're a friendly of NATO, like right now is a perfect example. Everybody in NATO is like, because if one single NATO country gets involved in interfering with Ukraine and Russia, then they all, like, it's World War III.
Article 5 is you probably heard about it under Trump, because he said in some cases he wouldn't defend NATO. He wouldn't trigger Article 5, which is hey, you come in our country, we got to defend you. It's been triggered with 9/11. So it's kind of like how I'd put it is the military arm of the UN, like the really hardcore defensive arm. And it is not something that is offensive, even though Putin would argue that it is. But yeah, if they were to invade Latvia or Estonia or Poland, then the United States would, by law, be forced into an action.
Right.
And so you don't want this to escalate. I don't know that I'm as hardcore statist as Trisha is on this. And Harry, we've got several comments here that don't sell guns to that group sounds a bit statist, but whatever. So Trisha doesn't
I'm against
support Ukrainian
the United
self-defense?
States government selling weapons that they got from taxpayers. And sending them over. I'm against them selling weapons in the Middle East to Saudis. I don't think that's statist at all.
Is that crazy, Harry? Is that statist of her?
Now, if it was Elon Musk and he wanted to do it, I mean, if he didn't take so many government subsidies, I'd say go for it, I guess. I don't know.
First off, an Elon Musk weapon would be terrible, because the moment it break down, you couldn't get parts for it. Couldn't get an update. It'd be a piece of junk just sitting
nowhere
there,
to plug it in.
Right, yeah, and you end up having to go grab some 30-year-old SU, off the thing to shoot down some, brand new MiGs, What? No. Allowing American company or any countries to or just not selling, not restricting companies to sell armaments to people in need. It's definitely needed, and that happens a lot. A lot of people wondering why India was helping out Russia. It was like, well, India was in need of desperate need of MiGs and naval weapons to deal with China, because China's been shooting and doing on their border. China has been acting to India like it's their Ukraine, so Russia had to sell them a bunch of weapons to calm that stuff down. So sorry, I'm a little soft on Russia when it comes to messing with China.
Yeah, I mean, Russia to me is like a junior actor in this. I don't think there's any missed communication here when Putin goes to the Olympics, sits in the box with Xi Jinping, the president of China. Jinping probably told him, all right, yeah, you can invade. We know you're going to get hit with sanctions. We'll keep your lines of credit open, but do it after the Olympics. What's interesting is now all of the people, like during the UN Security Council meeting yesterday, there was a vote to tisk tisk Russia. And China abstained from the vote when they were expected to vote for Russia. And this is a pattern that is happening with a lot of Putin's allies right now. Orban in Hungary said that they are not going to block any sanctions against Russia. Kazakhstan said that they're not going to send troops. Those are two Russia-aligned. The French held a supply boat in the English Channel today, which if you look at Russian media like TASS, T-A-S-S, that's the lead story, is the French have seized this boat. Look, this is righteous. Look at the Western aggression. Which is why it's so important for the United States not to get involved, because the Russian people are protesting, the oligarchs are being personally sanctioned, and the second the United States takes military action, all of that momentum from Putin's allies that are putting pressure on him and all of the Russian people that are speaking out against this. I have several ties into Russia and had them scan feeds and send me screenshots, and it's overwhelmingly negative against this action within Russia. And it's very unpopular. But the second we take action, that will end, and it will draw us into a larger conflict. And sometimes the best course of action is to not do anything. And if you act because you want to solve the problem because you're upset watching the news over a territory that you didn't know existed until 3 days ago, it's not wise, right? So does anybody want to give me kudos and say, gosh, Chris, you're exactly right based on historical facts and figures? Trisha?
Yeah, I want to say that it was so unlikely that the United States would actually put boots on the ground in Ukraine defending Ukraine. It would make no logical sense.
How can he pull us out of Afghanistan and say we're never doing that again, and within 6 months go, never mind?
Yeah. And it's just a war that wouldn't really be won. Not that we don't do those,
right.
But I think on a lot of fronts, it's not like going to war in the Middle East where the information doesn't get out the same way.
Right.
These are developed countries, and Russia has a lot of resources where you can do what you want to a couple poor Middle Eastern countries when you've got Saudis behind you. It wouldn't be the same thing there. It would just. I don't think it's going to happen.
Anybody else want to weigh in on what happens if the United States gets involved?
Well, you're also really right.
Gary?
It's the you're forcing, like the way China does. If China voted to go with Russia, they will end up like losing a little bit of face on this one. And then Xi Jinping is on very rocky ground anyways, trying to become dictator for life in China anyways. He's trying to gather votes inside of China, so he's fighting that battle there. And if we lose face again inside of China because they backed Russia and they don't end up winning on that or on that first one on the world stage, well, like everyone thinks like China's like some this like communist Chinese party, but no, there's fractions that are happening in there, and she just can't afford to go along with him right there at that point.
Mac?
Yeah, and this is complete talking out of my butt, but I think it's a kind of a win-win for China with Russia. They're not outwardly supporting them. They're not outwardly rebuffing them either to a certain degree. I think if Russia succeeds, they have a ally that is now bolstered in their strength a little bit. They'll be pretty weak financially for a while, but they will have basically in lockstep another country that they can say, look what they just did, But right now, Russia is, and I have a theory about what's going on. We can maybe touch on it later about what's actually going on the ground. But Russia's faltering a little bit, and I think that's worrying the allies, where they're saying, Russia might lose this, and we don't know if we want to throw our hat in the ring with them right now.
Well, China also is watching the West's resolve and NATO's resolve in regards to an invasion of Taiwan, because if the world doesn't stand up and doesn't fulfill its promises, aka the United States, for guaranteed security, then he takes Taiwan instantly. But yeah, the Russians, Mac, I'm watching some of this stuff in Telegram channels and on Twitter like you. I don't know how much, Reinhold is joining us and Harry and Trisha, like how much you're watching. I'm wildly surprised at how janky the Russian military equipment looks, how poorly they're doing. The Ukrainian government, which you have to take with a big grain of salt, says that 2,000 soldiers have been killed and all this equipment has been destroyed, which America lost 2,500 soldiers in Afghanistan over 20 years. So 2,000 soldiers in an action like this in 3 days is a lot, if that is a true number. So I'm surprised at how kind of anemic they are.
Okay.
Go ahead, Reinhold.
I don't mind. Part of the reason why they're seeming anemic is because they don't have the people the people who are fighting, the armies, the actual boots on the ground. They're not committed to this. This isn't like the Ukrainians are defending their home. They're defending their people, their neighbors, their lives, and they're fighting. They're going to fight to the death. Yeah. Whereas the Russian guys are just coming in. They're like, we don't really want to be here. We don't think this is right. Most of them probably aren't agreeing with us, and they're seeing what's happening, and they're having second thoughts. And it's kind of like how when the United States went to Vietnam, the people who are fighting there didn't have any stake in that. They didn't want to be there. They were just trying to survive. Right. So, the people in Vietnam were defending themselves to, strong. That's why they were able to hold them off as much as they were at the time. So here is the same thing. They're running into that issue. Plus the fact that Ukrainian, defenses are fairly good. The Stinger, the anti-missile stuff that they have, the anti-tank stuff that they have is really doing a good job at defending and taking out a lot of the Russian equipment. That the Russian equipment, they put some stuff on their tanks to prevent anti-tank fire from damaging them, and it's not helping. They're just going right through it with the weaponry that they have now, and it's just a case where I think Putin kind of thought he would be able just to roll right in.
So I saw on Sky News, which is on Pluto TV. It's a British channel. I think it's a Rupert Murdoch company. Infinitely more informative than CNN. You watch CNN and it's just total garbage right now. You don't learn anything. You just get feelings. That's the thing about Fox and CNN. You get a lot of feelings, but you don't really get a lot of information. But one analyst was basically saying that Putin thought that he'd be welcome, like in the Anschluss when Hitler went into Austria, and you see the videos of all the Germans waving and cheering because he's come to save us. That has not happened in the two regions that he invaded. It has not happened across the country. He's been met with citizens with Molotov cocktails. I mean, Mac, this is maybe a time to talk about the crazy psycho behavior of Ukrainians. Like the old lady walking up to the two soldiers to hand them seeds saying, plant these in your pocket so when you die, you can sprout some sunflowers and provide something of value to our country. Or the guy running up and hitting a tank with his shoe, and then the tank veers towards him and he doesn't even flinch, or the guy getting run over. This is just, these people are crazy. They're who Americans think they are, who they want to be, but are not.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are based. I mean, if you think about it, that whole region is like, war is just like apple pie. That's it's in their blood. They've done it forever. But
literally.
I mean, that's the whole Russian Empire, starting out in Kiev and expanding outward from there. The interesting thing, and I agree with Reinhold, I think the Russian troops generally don't have the same moral backbone to their fight. I also am seeing a pattern emerge from the intelligence I'm gathering on Twitter. And I know that sounds weird, but Twitter is actually one of the best places for aggregating on the ground live accounts of stuff. And Chris, you've seen, I'm flooding people's feeds, and I'm sure I'm annoying a bunch of people.
Me too. What's your Twitter handle?
Anarch Actual. And ANARCHACTUAL. But what I'm seeing is a pattern of some of these Russian troops that are being captured. They're like fresh conscripts. They just got out of basic. They just learned how to drive their machinery and operate the guns. These are 17, 18, 19-year-olds. These are not seasoned veterans. And the other thing is that they're behaving like that. And it's really strange to see them. I just posted a clip this morning, or retweeted a clip this morning, of a Russian Tiger, which is like an equivalent of a American MRAP, if you're familiar with that, the upgraded version of the Hummer, Humvee. And it's coming in contact with what appears to be, at least to me, a Ukrainian Stella 10, which is a surface-to-air missile armored vehicle. If you're on the ground, there's not, unless it runs you over like it did that one guy, a Stella 10 is not going to do much. It's got to have, try to fire it up close. There's different precautions and things that they have set up. So it's not really designed to engage ground targets. It's designed to engage aerial targets. But these Russian guys are, they're coming at each other. The Russian guys are going up, and then they stop and they start reversing. They're like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. It's like, you're so untrained or inexperienced, you don't realize that can't do anything to you. I mean, yeah, okay, back away and go away, but it can't cause any damage. So they just open fire with their 50 cal or whatever they have mounted on that Tiger. And of course, it's an armored vehicle, so it didn't really do anything. And the Ukrainian Stella 10 just goes right past it. And then Brody in western Ukraine, about 103 kilometers northeast of Lviv. Some random Russian troops tried an assault there, where it's like they're way behind enemy lines. They had no support, and they just got wiped out and chased into the trees by Ukrainian helicopters and a bunch of Ukrainian soldiers out there. So they're doing a lot. And then of course the tanks are running out of gas. That video of that guy going up to the tank that's broken down on the highway. He's like, oh, what's going on? The Russians are like, oh, we ran out of gas. He's like, oh, I get to help tow you back to Russia if you want,
Yeah, there's like 200 miles of interstate between Belarus and Kiev, and the Ukrainian military is being successful in blocking a lot of these routes and cutting off supplies and starting to starve out some Russian soldiers. But they're also taking a heavy beating in Kiev. And I would be surprised. The way that a lot of this stuff works a lot of times is you get the initial contact. You get the Ukrainians. The Russians made a mistake in not taking out Ukrainian. Like, they are the second largest military. They could have sent rockets into every air and naval installation in the country, bombed every single one of those, and then gone in. And that was what everybody expected if it was going to be a full-scale invasion like this. And instead, they didn't do that. And so now they're taking heavy losses. But Russia has 900,000 troops that they can call up. They have 1,300 tanks. They have an infinitely larger military than the Ukraine that they can bring in. And if this continues, if this goes on, if there's not a peace agreement in the next week or two, then Russia can send in those Chechen troops, which are going in for peacekeeping and are known for being brutal. They can send in more military, more tanks, especially if Putin starts to be perceived in the world as if he's losing. He is like 5'4". He has little man syndrome. He's not going to tolerate that. And he's gambling it all on this. So if he looks like he's losing, it may start to amp up. I would bet that Kiev, it's being surrounded. It's on 3 fronts right now. Another big offensive tonight. They probably take the city in the next day or two. They find, this is my speculation as to what is going to happen in the coming weeks. They find Zelensky, they kill him, they throw the country into political chaos. They lock down the country as a result, lock down the borders, which is why everybody's fleeing, lock down the Ukrainian media, stop all of the video from leaving Ukraine. They've shut down in their own country access to Facebook in Russia. I went to look at some Putin speeches today, and their website for the Kremlin was down. And so you're going to have, Harry, I think, a country that's in political chaos and a puppet government instituted. He's already got some successors picked out that he wants as president, and that'll probably happen pretty quick.
Exactly. And you could see the steps made by Putin, like going back, and because hindsight is 2020. Because at the start of the new year, everyone watched Russia's crackdown on the Tor network of getting rid of the onion routers. Basically, a lot. It's if someone was sitting there on the network on the side of the Russian internet, like, hey, we're going to block these things, they're going to go DNS. The only other way out would try to use Tor, and Russia started to crack down on that, but they're trying to explain for other distant reasons. And now it's like, oh, this is to stop other information getting it out. They started it then because doing it now it'd be too late. But then they could get ahead of the game. They get ahead of the game. So only like the people who are really into it are getting information in and out once they start the crackdown on the internet inside of Russia.
Yeah, and then you enter a period of long, protracted warfare. You enter into a period, which is why they're handing out 10,000 machine guns to people, creating Molotov cocktails and filling them with styrofoam, because they know that it's going to be a long, protracted. They may take the country and they may install a government, but it's going to be a long civil war. Which it's already been a long simmering civil war for basically the entire history of this country. We're just putting our view on it in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if Taiwan is watching this thing happen and watching this play out, you probably should change your stance on civilian weapons ownership at this point.
Did they not allow it in Taiwan?
No, civilian ownership. Yeah, no, you're not allowed to own a weapon like a rifle or handgun for civilian ownership inside of Taiwan. Yeah, I know. It sounds kooky, right?
Yeah.
Considering like you're on the threat of invasion, I kind of want everyone to have a rifle. Just take some loans out, make sure everyone's got it. But hey, that's me. I'm that kooky guy. But because you're seeing Ukraine later passing these out, that's a step. That could have happened a month ago. That could have happened a year ago, and people could have been trained on those rifles that they already have, thinking that this is going to happen.
Anybody else want to weigh in on what they think is going to happen next? Mac?
I will also say this to people who's trying to produce that too, is that we're also going to be, the rest of the world is going to be up against propaganda and spin, the likes that we have never experienced. We have used to political spin for like elections, everything else, but this is war propaganda spin, and from coming like a former superpower that is used to doing something like this. So
if you thought the last 2 years was crazy, you youngins that got politically involved in the last 5 years don't know war propaganda like like Reinhold. I mean, imagine how many wars he's seen. But we'll talk about the propaganda next. I want to finish up with what's going to happen next. Mac, then Trisha.
Okay, sorry. I think that's along the lines of being correct, although I'm less certain now. I have two theories about the potential second wave that Russia's sent in. Estimates is that they've only sent about half the invasion force so far. So, one theory is that they sent in the freshies, the newbies, the cannon fodder, just to go and wear down the Ukrainians before they send in the veterans. Because now the Chechens have mobilized, from what I've seen. They're headed to the front lines, from what I gather, and those guys are, as one of my friends put it, war crimes are us. I mean, those guys are mean guys, and they're committed, and they have a higher
and you cannot have the press and TikTok watching these battle hardened guys.
I mean, temporarily, till if they see you filming, you're getting roped into their sites. That's concerning. So my theory is that I think, at least if I'm giving a lot more steel manning Putin's tactics here, is I think he's sending, he's basically trying to soften up the Ukrainian forces and wear them down, and then send in the real hard hitters behind, all these newbies. Because like I said, a lot, and I know that this is somewhat skewed, because that's just the information I've seen. I haven't seen the whole battle space, obviously, but numerous of these Russians that are captured are just like confused, and they're telling people, well, this is an exercise. And I'm sure that's something they're being instructed to say to some degree, but also like you can just see the confusion on their face. Like they're like, wait, what? We're in Ukraine. Like I thought we were and I think they honestly believe it's a peacekeeping mission. And they're like, well, wait a minute, these civilians are, I'm fog of war, and like this doesn't seem right. And they're starting to click, I think, for some of them. So yeah, I think what ends up happening is that if that track is correct, Kiev probably falls within the next 24, 48 hours, in a major way, maybe not completely, kind of depends. Russia hasn't had a lot of practice at least these troops having a lot of urban warfare practice. This is home turf for Ukraine. You can hide a lot of javelin missiles in those buildings and take out armor as they try to, weave their way through the cities. The civilians that volunteered took out a lot of armored guys coming in that were supposedly special forces, but they might have been one of those weird police brigades that like broke off randomly. There's a lot of weird chaos in the Russian troops that are just, I can't explain what they're doing. I think it's the only thing that makes sense is that Putin decided to send people that don't know what they're doing just to cause chaos and wear Ukraine down. But yeah, they're going to have, this is like their Afghanistan part 2 after they did in Afghanistan the first time, I think.
Yeah, this is going to play differently in the world. I kept hearing on Sky TV, it just looks like World War II. They live in cities like us. They look like us. Like, the world has really watched a lot of small villages being bombed in faraway, remote places, like, with Muslims living in them, right? And Trisha, this is going to be the first war on TikTok where 2 white Christian nations are fighting each other. And that's, I think, going to hit differently for a lot of people who couldn't connect to the Muslim experience through the terror wars.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Echoing a little bit of what Mike said.
Couldn't or wouldn't connect, I should say, Trisha.
Well, yeah. I mean, like I was saying, they're more developed countries. And so obviously, we're not going to watch a TikTok video of a grain silo in Yemen being bombed or a hospital.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but I keep thinking that it doesn't make a lot of sense that Russia would go in and just be so unprepared and not have quite a mission. Like you said, running out of gas. Like, to me, that doesn't make sense. And there has to be an explanation behind it. Yeah. And I hadn't heard what Mike had said about some soldiers saying, oh, this is a training exercise, which obviously, they could be coached to say that. But it seems like it's disorganized for a reason. So maybe we all, hey, look, Ukraine is, doing wonderful and Russia really overestimated themselves and they have hubris, or we're all falling into some kind of trap. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, which lends me to believe that something else is going to happen. But yeah, it'll be strange to watch it. Even when we went through the Iraq war and Afghanistan, we really didn't have the same social media that we have now, at least at the beginning of the war.
Yeah.
Developed over 20 years. But I think it'll be interesting and to watch people identify with people more and see their reactions, which actually makes me really sad.
Which you should then, and I bring this up because you should then impose those emotions on people in Yemen.
Yeah,
because they're going through the same thing.
Their children are dying because they have diarrhea. They're dying of diarrhea because there's no clean water, and it's a very curable thing, and it's heartbreaking. But if we can't see it and we don't identify with those people, and a celebrity doesn't sing a song about it.
By the way, 9 p.m. tonight on my Facebook, I will be debuting my poem for peace. So please tune in. I just want to make this all about me. That's what's important. Reinhold, how do you think this plays out?
I think this plays out where one of 2 ways. One is the Ukrainians can put up a good defense. I think Kiev may fall, but I think you're going to find that most of the leadership have kind of skedaddled a little bit to better places to kind of defend and let them just keep trying to find them.
Because if Zelensky dies, that's the decapitation of the government. You have no elected government at that point, and you'd have to hold.
Yeah, but it doesn't.
Elections.
It doesn't turn. It doesn't turn to Ukrainians going, "Oh, I guess we just lost and we'll give up." That's not going to happen. They're going to try to, fight to put somebody else back in of their making, because that's what they fought for years ago anyway, right? So they wanted to have the people in charge be the people they wanted to be in charge, not somebody's puppet. So they're really strong about that in their views. So I think what's going to happen. So if that happens, and then there's just more negative, press and positioning and everything else through the world stage, Putin's going to have to think about whether he needs to want to continue doing this or not. What's the ultimate benefit doing it, because once he gets Ukraine, he's going to still have resistance fighting there a lot. And if he does actually take over Ukraine, I've got a feeling that there's some countries next door to Ukraine, like Poland and some others, who are going to demand that they do something about it.
That's why I don't understand why he did it, because why would you sign up for long protracted warfare with the people that are battle hardened and crazy and fully stocked with weapons?
Yeah, he had to somehow believe that the people in Ukraine wanted him to do this.
I mean, the one of the impeachments of Trump was because he was withholding military aid to the Ukraine. Like, you watch these videos, Mac, and they're all American weapons. Like, they're not fighting with sticks. So let's finish here. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask each of you, what should America do about this, and how should we keep our head on a swivel to avoid being propagandized and being sucked into being afraid? Let's start with Trisha.
Yeah, I think being propagandized and, getting the American people to want a war, which I don't think that we would go, put boots on the ground, American military boots on the ground. I don't think that's wise. I'm not really sure what the hell people are thinking when they're, glamorizing this war, because everybody's like, I feel so bad for them. I'm going to pray for those people. And then, they're making up myths about ghost planes and things like that, because war's not pretty. And it's not an adventure, and it's not something cool, and it's not for, Chads to do. It just really hurts a lot of people, and generations after generations. They lose life, culture, wealth. And so I think it's really important to stand back and just know that no matter how much you feel like you want to go aid somebody that is being invaded, regardless of knowing a lot about the situation or not, it's never going to do anything that's going to be helpful. You can't say, oh, somebody's got to do something. That's always, whenever somebody says that, they end up doing something that in the end hurts other people. So whether your intentions are good, it doesn't really matter, because good intentions, they can easily lead to hell. And as we can see, throughout history and war and getting ourselves involved in conflict. So I just think it's really good to remain calm, not be like, so, oh yeah, let's go get them. I'm going to send Kyle Rittenhouse over with a gun. It's like, are you an idiot? I really hate that propaganda, and I really hate the onus on us to do something somewhere else in the world.
Mac?
I agree. I mean, despite our previous, part of me thinks it sucks that we keep doing this to the Kurds, the Ukrainians, to all these people who make these promises. I told someone the other day, it's like, if you trust the U.S. government and you don't have any nukes, you should stop that immediately. I mean,
when all else failed last year, the best they could do is $1,200. They can't even help their own people. They're not coming to help you. Stop trusting these people.
I didn't get my $1,200.
DCS, your local school, the American military, they really care. They honestly do, but they just can't do anything for you. If you're the president of another country listening to this program, they can't do anything for you. Stop believing them.
Yeah.
Unless you have nukes.
CEO of a multinational corporation, they can do something for you, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, a CEO with nukes, that'd be really ANCAP based. But no,
go ahead.
I think, I agree. We need to break the cycle. I mean, it sucks having to say, sorry, Ukraine, we told you could get rid of your nukes and then we'd defend you. But I think if we can't keep doing this as a country, at least. I say I'm not doing anything, but the government can't keep doing this to its people, because we're extracting the wealth and lives of our citizens and others by making all these promises. We tell Libya we're cool, and then it's like, actually, we're not so cool anymore. We don't like you anymore. I know we used your black sites to, take people out and torture them. But yeah, I think, the pure ANCAP libertarian, whatever it means, is like, we need to not even, and I agree. So what Trisha said earlier, I don't think that the U.S. government should be supplying any arms. If Ukraine wants to buy them from Boeing or Raytheon themselves, I think whatever. Like, we shouldn't block that. But yeah, as far as spending taxpayer money, and of course they're heavily subsidized, so it's like you can't untangle this whole wide world's a big entangled mess of BS. But yeah, I say, bring our folks home. Let's maybe worry about our own stuff for a little while, and if we're going to be spending all this money, I'd rather spend it on our defense. I don't think, Russia's proving right now that they would be cuckoo to try to do a land invasion to the United States, because they're invading a country about the size of California in both population and landmass, with like a tiny fraction of California's GDP, and
having trouble,
having some issues. U.S. needs to. I would say, for the propaganda thing, don't be so scared. I mean, look at the actual geography and logistics. Logistics is a huge thing. And Russia can't keep fuel in their tanks. Literal tanks. They can't keep their troops supplied with food. They're breaking into grocery stores because they're hungry. They're tired. They're just abandoning armor and weapons on the highways of Ukraine because they're like, it's out of gas. There's no gas stations to fill my tank, and I don't want to get shot. So
much like the pandemic should be instructive for each and every one of you. Oh my God, this is going to be the worst thing ever. But if you want to go protest for George Floyd, you're going to be fine. I guess it's not that bad. Okay. Well, yeah, that should have been an instructive thing. Like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Oh wait, this wasn't as bad as we all thought, right? Like, people do get hurt. People are there, but like that like sense of rising tension that is constantly there, it makes you make bad decisions, and politicians take advantage of that, and you need to watch when that tempo and the heat of a story is there, and just be calm and rational about it. If you go to Kroger, Russian troops are not going to invade and kill you for your Hot Pockets. Reinhold, what should America do about this, and how do we avoid the propaganda?
What the United States should do about this is to provide humanitarian aid, to be a force of pointing out that the propaganda that the right is, or the Russians are pushing out, is
Freudian slip,
bonked. Yeah, a little bit. But we need to also make sure that we're not falling into any propaganda traps that we're going to provide too, to try to get people ginned up to go to war, because we're not going to do that. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's the best thing for the environment, for Ukraine, is for us to have United States troops in there, because then they're not defending their own country. Outside people are coming in and fighting in their lands. I don't think they would be appreciative of that either. I think they're appreciative of, weapon assistance, humanitarian assistance, things like that. That's fine. I just don't think that they want our troops there. And I think that would go over like a lead balloon if we did. So, but as far as avoiding the propaganda, you really have to, there's one thing that kind of irritates me about this whole thing is that, people are trying to say, well, United States shouldn't have done all this stuff and been involved in Ukraine and created this whole thing and backed the revolution or coup or however you want to call it. There are a lot of things the United States should not have done, and there's a lot of things that they've done wrong, but none of it validates what Putin is doing right now. There was nothing that was done that was to the point where Russia needed to go in and take over that country.
Right.
And invade. So there's a lot of things we can sit and say about United States did wrong and we didn't help the situation and we kind of helped prolong it and put it in this place. But at the end of the day, it's Putin who's being the aggressor, who's done the wrong thing, who's went over the top. And we need to keep that clear when we're discussing that.
You can be unashamedly anti-Putin and anti-war at the same time. Like, we don't, like, I don't know. I'll address that later. Harry, what should America do, and how do you stay 100?
All right, so which is scary thing is the afterwards thing of this whole thing is the U235 question that's on the table right now, because if you ain't got none, and if you don't have an agreement in paper ratified by the U.S. Congress, the U.S. probably ain't got your back. And it also shows that, listen, the U.S., as bolstered as it is protected by a gigantic lake, two massive lakes, a crappy country up north and another crappy country below it. So it's really hard to get troops to it. And it shows how hard it is to move troops. And that's why the idea of China invading Taiwan is just like, well, you could send some planes over there, but you've got to get people over that awful strait of water. Good luck doing that. Once again, thanks for the bits, Jack. But I think one thing they have to do is probably get more ratified treaties with people to simmer people down after this, because if not, how many of these countries are watching this happening, of having fights with neighbors or other former superpowers that what, we need a nuclear program. There's a lot of unemployed physicists in America we can get here to start our nuclear program, and because we need one, because obviously it's the only thing that kicks people down, and which is a terrible sentiment and a terrible way to go into this new century. It's awful. I hate this aspect of this whole, the idea of it. I hopefully the United States also stay out of a land war in Europe. It's hopefully they also don't bolster up any other countries that are NATO allies. That's like, hey, you know what, we've got this. Just go ahead and do this, because the rope-a-dope punch of Russia, the idea of sending in your newbies to get Ukrainians to wear them out, see what they have, get them to use what they, the best things they have, wear them out, get them low on ammo, and then bring that jab punch back and see if they will stretch, because they're not, they're fighting their military and civilians. They'll get out of position and out of their holes where they're stronger. And if they start going after and chasing, well, then it's going to be a different story. So I don't really see them. I don't really also recently see Russia sending in Chechens into Ukraine, because they can't control the narrative over there. But if they keep them on the Russian side of the border to get them to outstretch out there, yeah, I can see that happening out there. So I know, bleak, awful future that Harry thinks about when, everyone's thinking about, making nuclear programs. It's going to be awful, terrible.
So Harry, Ascalja says, have you seen where the Russian soldiers have been filmed mishandling BOFA? What is that? What's BOFA?
No. Why did you do that?
BOFA these nuts. In terms of what we should do about it, man, I don't know. I'm glad I'm not in charge. I think it's kind of weak sauce to sanction Putin. Like, the guy's the richest man in the world, allegedly. He knew sanctions were coming. Him and the foreign minister have been bleeding that country dry forever. He has open lines to China, likely for his personal funds. So it's at least something, I guess. In terms of shutting off access to banks and banning exports to Russia, where does the president of the United States get the constitutional authority or moral authority to tell a private company they can't exchange with other companies? But the moral thing to do is what the F1 and all these soccer folks are doing, is saying, I will not work with them. I will not have my event here. I'm cutting ties. I'm cutting personal ties. That's certainly something to do. In terms of cutting them out of SWIFT, SWIFT is the language of banking transactions. It's like the code that makes my bank talk to Harry's bank. So cutting Russians out of SWIFT means not being able to Venmo them $20. And it means that if you work for a Russian company, they're not going to be able to pay you. So it's easy to kind of turn off. It's very hard to turn it back on. Sanctions rarely work. They've been sanctioning Putin and oligarchs for a long time, for over 10 years now. That clearly has not deterred his behavior. The Russian people have had a shrinking economy in part due to it. Iran got cut out of the SWIFT system, and they're still doing exactly what we don't want them to do as a government, right? So I don't know how effective that stuff actually is. I mean, if you're president of the United States, you got to do some phony baloney stuff. I get it. But none of it's effective. None of it really works. And it hurts the poor people and the regular people of Russia. And in some cases, maybe that's what they need. They've chosen Putin. They've kept him in power. The people ultimately, and you could listen. You don't want your small business closed down. Don't close it down. If you don't want to wear a mask, stop wearing a mask. I've said this from the beginning of the pandemic. We are in charge of our government. The people rule. They govern by tacit consent, and the more that you give people consent to rule over you. What are you laughing at, Trisha? It's the truth. If you're Russian, go fuck Putin up.
You think those people honestly have fair elections, or that anything there is not completely controlled by the state under threat of force?
Yeah, well, there's a lot more of them than anybody else.
I didn't consent to shit.
Well,
I never buy that argument. You deserve what you voted for.
It's not what you vote for. There's thousands of people in the streets knowing that they're going to be locked up in Russia. That stuff matters. That is an important signal to the government where they're at. Like, that stuff actually does eventually work. Like, Putin is way over his skis. At some point, the oligarchs and the people are going to overthrow this guy because he's gone too far. And just kind of sitting around and saying, oh, gee, this is just, what I learned on the honeymoon. We spent 4 hours with a Russian couple. I think I've talked about on the shows. Like, they're not in support of Putin. They just feel helpless. They feel completely disconnected from politics. They don't want to think about it. They're almost exactly like Americans. What am I really going to do about it? I guess I'll just let it happen to me. Like, at some point, that's the wrong fucking attitude to have about the people that rule over you. Get in their face. Get involved. They can't get away with it if we all do that thing. So
yeah, but they've spent 12 years being conditioned to think that any step outside the bounds of authority means severe consequences. Yeah. So,
and they're still willing to go out there and do that now. You look at the thousands of people out there protesting currently.
No, I kind of half agree with both sides because, it works, but you have to have a pretty good consensus. And I think people have to be pushed just slightly outside their comfort zone where they're pissed off for it to be able to be effective. Like you've seen with the COVID lockdowns, especially with, like Arizona is nice because we kind of had a little freak out for like a month and then everybody's like, whatever. Like we haven't had really any restrictions here since May of 2020. So, it's hard to kind of rally because some of the cities, like Tucson, for example, is a really liberal county and city, and they've tried to impose local restrictions, and they've met some pushback, but it's also really strange because it's like patchwork, But I agree with what you're saying, Chris, that it's at some point, I think it needs to be pushed back on. But I also think Trisha's right. It's like it's really hard to do. I mean, look at North Korea. Like they live on some of the most brutal conditions for decades. And there ain't no uprising going on in there.
How does it get
propagandized into thinking that's right?
We are watching it in Canada. We're watching it in the United States. How do you get there? To a hopeless place. You get there because
the prison. Prison's all you know.
It creeps, and you don't stand up. And when you don't stand up, it creeps to a point where it's too far. And so, I'm just saying, Russia, get the truckers together. Let's do this.
You can't comply yourself out of a tyrant and also try to compare Russia to North Korea is not the same.
No,
North Korea
for sure.
is completely different. Like that's apples to like
no,
disease,
I'm not trying to make a comparison to that. I'm just saying that's the extreme example of you're literally born as a child into a prison, and that's all you know.
Right.
All you know is the cell walls, the literature that's given to you, your little poster. You're not allowed to look out the window. There's no windows really. I mean, North Korea, there's USB drives and stuff get dropped and stuff like that. But that's just what I'm saying. It's like it's not quite as easy as, hey guys, let's just stop complying with these guys with the tanks and the guns and the people that have been telling us this narrative our whole life. You know what I mean?
But yeah, even in North Korea, like even they're rich with their like 1970s rich comparatively who sneak over into China most of the time. They even they're having some grumblings and stuff that's going on, stuff like through there. It's just like they have, like I said, it's a completely different like a barrel of oranges like with this one because it's a almost a different world at that point because they are so far behind everything else or everyone else around them. even in that whole area.
The Ukrainian people have consistently overthrown their government through the tactics of Gene Sharp, who I've talked about on the show, through nonviolent action, and it works. So, and I want to say to Besanova, who's a Russian who's watching on YouTube right now, we don't think about politics. We do get involved. It just doesn't work out yet. The word "yet" was the best part of that statement, and I want to make it clear. I love the Russian people. I've met many great Russians. I love Ukrainians. We are not at war with any of you. We want you to be happy, peaceful, prosperous. We're sorry for your government being oppressive to you. We hate it here in our case as well. I will say on a personal note, this has taken on something, a new layer of watching the news. I've always loved foreign policy. It's what made me a libertarian. This past summer, we had 4 Ukrainian orphans come and stay with my in-laws, 8 to 13, 14. And came back for Christmas, and they're 4 of the loveliest kids. They're like Ukrainians. They basically they just beat the hell out of each other. They have the demeanor of like a Korean War vet working at an Ace Hardware. They are like tough kids, and I know they're really scared right now. They're I'm not going to tell you where they're at. You know, we have intermittent conversation with them right now. They're in an orphanage that has been drained because people are fleeing the country. And we may be in a position soon to get those kids out. And I may come to this audience and ask you to donate to help make that happen. Reagan and I have been talking for months about adopting them, but we're just in a position where we can't do that. We're newlyweds. But it's like, what can you do if you got the cash? Adopt some Ukrainian orphans right now, because there's an orphanage of newborns up to teenagers who are going to be sent to the front lines and drafted. And that's one thing you can do if you have the resources. If not, I mean, what can we do in the face of the violent state? What can you do? You turn to humanity. And that is the point of this show. You do anything you possibly can do to make the lives better of the people suffering at the hands of a government that has gone too far. And having kids text you that they're like hiding under their bed is just terrible. And fuck Vladimir Putin. It doesn't mean, fuck war. It's the worst possible thing that can happen. When it comes to libertarianism, war should be avoided at all costs. That's the slogan that we should adopt. Lee Wright's message from 2012. I'm not at war with you. I'm not at war with a Russian. I'm not at war with, a liberal. I'm not at war with a conservative. Reinhold is not at war with Mises Caucus Mac over here. Like, we're not at war with each other. And if you continually adopt the psychology of I am not at war with you, in the great words of Lee Wright, this world becomes more peaceful, because then you find new means instead of turning to force to make change. So keep those kids in your prayers. Thank you for listening to the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you for joining us. And we just appreciate everybody that supports us. If you got something out of the show, please share it with your friends. Hopefully you learned something. And thank you to Mac, Trisha, and Reinhold, and Harry for being with us. Thanks for joining us here on the Chris Spangle Show this week.